When the big storm finally passed, the people of Millbrook gathered around their fallen landmark, a 200-year-old oak tree that had been a part of their town square for many years. As workers started to remove the large root system, operator Samuel Turner noticed something strange and immediately stopped all work. When town officials came to see the unusual find beneath the old roots, they were left speechless. Millbrook was just a small spot on the map, located in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and green forests. What made this place special to its residents were the grand oak trees that had seen the town's entire history. Among these trees was one that stood out, a huge oak tree in the town square, estimated to be over 200 years old. This was no ordinary tree. It was nearly 70 feet tall, and its trunk was so wide that 5 adults holding hands couldn't wrap around it. The oak had become the heart of Millbrook. Every important event in the town's history happened under its wide branches. Weddings, festivals, and public announcements all took place in the shade of what locals called the Old Oak. For generations, the tree was a source of pride. But in recent years, more and more residents, especially newer ones, began to see the ancient trees as a problem rather than a treasure. Leading this movement was Alexander Price, a business developer who had moved to town just 3 years prior. Price was a charismatic man who knew how to work a crowd. At town meetings, he would pace back and forth, pointing to photographs of damaged property and broken sidewalks. He gathered homeowners who had experienced problems, turning their individual complaints into a collective grievance against the old trees. The Miller family became unwilling celebrities in this campaign when their basement wall cracked from the pressure of growing roots. The repair costs had nearly bankrupted them. Other stories followed. The Johnsons' plumbing system had been completely destroyed by invasive roots, the community center's foundation was shifting, and several historic sidewalks had buckled beyond repair. Price argued passionately that the town was clinging to the past at the expense of the future. The land occupied by these trees, particularly the central oak, could be used for commercial development that would bring jobs and prosperity to Millbrook. His campaign gained momentum, especially among homeowners dealing with costly repairs. On the opposing side stood a coalition of conservationists, historians, and longtime residents who viewed the trees as living monuments. They argued that the trees predated the town itself and deserved protection. Eleanor Smith, whose family had lived in Millbrook for 5 generations, often reminded everyone how her great-great-grandfather had proposed to his wife beneath the old oak. The debate divided the town, with each side becoming increasingly entrenched in their position. Price's group had successfully gathered enough signatures to force a town vote on removing all the ancient trees, starting with the old oak. The vote was scheduled for the following month, and tensions were running high. Then nature intervened in an unexpected way. Weather forecasters had warned of a significant storm, but Millbrook had survived many storms before, so no one anticipated anything unusual. They were mistaken. The storm that hit that night was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. Winds howled through the streets, tearing shutters from windows and ripping shingles from roofs. Rain fell in heavy sheets, turning streets into rivers and yards into ponds. Throughout the night, residents huddled in their homes, listening to the frightening sounds of cracking wood, crashing debris, and the relentless roar of wind and water. When dawn finally broke and people emerged from their homes, they found a changed landscape. Fallen branches littered the streets, power lines were down across the town, and several smaller trees had been completely uprooted. But the most shocking sight awaited them in the town square. The old oak, which had stood firm through centuries of storms, had finally met its match. The massive tree lay on its side, its enormous root system partially exposed like the tentacles of some prehistoric creature. The fall had damaged the eastern corner of the historic town hall, though thankfully no one had been injured. As residents gathered around the fallen giant, the reactions were as divided as the town itself had been. Eleanor Smith wept openly, her hand resting on the rough bark as if comforting an old friend. Others stood in silent respect, but there were also those who saw opportunity in the destruction. Alexander Price arrived wearing a business suit despite the early hour. In the chaos, while he expressed appropriate concern about the damage, there was an unmistakable gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. The storm had accomplished what his campaign had yet to achieve. With the old oak down, removing the rest would be easier to justify. The town council quickly organized recovery efforts, and within days, crews arrived with chainsaws and heavy equipment to clear the debris from the fallen landmark. Their plan was straightforward: cut the trunk for timber, grind the stump, and excavate the roots. Samuel Turner, a lifelong Millbrook resident with 30 years of construction experience, operated the main excavator. 3 hours into digging, he noticed something unusual and stopped to investigate. Instead of growing randomly, the roots formed hollow channels extending in specific directions, something he had never seen before. He called the site supervisor over, who was equally puzzled by the discovery. Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd gathered around the excavation site. The town mayor arrived, followed by several council members and curious residents. Samuel pointed out the unusual patterns in the root structure. The channels appeared deliberately formed, creating a complex network that extended far beyond what anyone had expected. Even more curious was the direction of these channels. They all seemed to lead away from the town center and toward the river that ran along the eastern edge of Millbrook. As the excavation continued under the watchful eyes of town officials, Samuel made another startling discovery. Nestled deep among the roots, protected by the very wood that many had wanted to destroy, was a cylindrical object. It was a copper tube, now green with age, but remarkably intact and sealed at both ends. The mayor carefully extracted the cylinder, and with gloved hands, opened it. Inside was a collection of yellowed papers, remarkably preserved. As he unfolded them, the crowd pressed closer, eager to see this unexpected treasure from the past. The documents turned out to be detailed maps and diagrams signed by Elijah Harris, the founder of Millbrook, who had established the settlement nearly 2 centuries ago. The papers reveal the truth about the town that had been forgotten over generations. According to Harris' writings, the valley location where he had chosen to build Millbrook was actually prone to severe flooding. Before establishing the settlement, he had observed that the low-lying area would be underwater for weeks each spring when snowmelt and rain combined to swell the nearby river beyond its banks. Harris, who had studied botany and engineering, had discovered a specific species of oak with an unusual ability. Its root system actively sought and channeled groundwater. He had selected the old oak sapling as the centerpiece of an ingenious natural drainage system. He had planted it in a precisely calculated location and added additional trees according to a careful plan. The extensive root systems did exactly what they were designed to do: pull water away from the town center and channel it through the elaborate underground network toward the river. The very damage that newer residents had complained about, foundations cracked, sidewalks buckled, gardens disturbed, was evidence of the trees performing their vital function. The last page of Harris' documents had a clear warning: if the central tree ever fell, a new one must be planted right away in the same spot. Without this important tree, the whole water management system would fail and the yearly floods would come back to flood the valley. When this news spread through the community, the mood changed quickly. The town council held an emergency meeting that evening. Engineers were asked for temporary drainage solutions, and horticulturists were brought in to choose and plant new young trees based on Harris' advice. For Alexander Price and those who had wanted to remove the trees, it was a humbling moment. The vote to take down the remaining old oaks was canceled unanimously. Instead, a special fund was created to help homeowners deal with root-related problems, a small cost compared to the serious floods that could threaten the whole community. In the end, the fallen old oak taught Millbrook an important lesson about respecting the wisdom of those who came before. The new young trees planted in the town square wouldn't grow as tall as the old oak in anyone's lifetime, but they would continue its important work. The copper cylinder and its contents were carefully kept and displayed in the town hall, reminding everyone that sometimes the answers to our biggest problems have been right under our feet all along. How far do you think we should go to protect nature's wisdom, even when it seems inconvenient in our modern lives?